Hi, I'm Skip Nipper. Welcome to my podcast,
where I tell you about not only Nashville's great baseball history and traditions,
shot to right, a one-hop liner,
but certainly about its past. And you will hear a little bit about its present and future, too.
Yes, he can. It makes the waist-high catch.
There are great stories about Tom Wilson Park, Herschel Greer Stadium, Sulphur Dell, and the players, coaches, and fans who love everything about baseball. And every once in a while, you will get to hear from a special guest who will share their fondness and even passion for the great game.
The high fly ball down the right field corner, going way back, hits a lead-off home run.
On July the 28th, 2015, at First Tennessee Park, now First Horizon Park, home of the Nashville Sounds, Jackson Street was renamed Junior Gilliam Way in honor of the former Los Angeles Dodgers player who was born in Nashville near Sulphur Dell, which was in the vicinity of Nashville's new ballpark. And Jackson Street led to the home plate entrance of the park. Gilliam's tribute not only called attention to a great player, but is a continuation of baseball's capability to shorten the gap from the segregation and integration eras. There are others whose contributions to Nashville's baseball history are honorable, like Henry Kimbrough, Hall of Famer Turkey Stearns, Sidney Bunch Jr., and Jim Zapp, and Clinton Butch McCord, and others should be worthy mentions too. And it is a fitting tribute, the renaming of Jackson Street to Junior Gilliam Way, for one of Nashville's favorite sons, one of Nashville's favorite baseball sons from baseball's post-integration era. But who was this man? Born James William Gilliam on October the 17th, 1928. Well, someone is here to tell us, and his name is Steve Ditmore, and he's the author of a book, The Forgotten Dodger, Junior Gilliam. And welcome, Steve. I'm grateful that you would take the time to speak with me so that others can learn more about Junior Gilliam.
Skip, I'm extremely happy to do it. Thank you so much for asking me.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about yourself,
Sure.
where you're from, and how you got to this point.
Yeah, so I currently live and work in Jacksonville, Florida. I serve as Dean of the Silverfield College of Education and Human Services at the University of North Florida. I spent about 10 years of my life in the 1990s working professionally in sports, and then in 2002, I decided I wanted to make a little switch and become an academic. And so I went back to school, got a PhD from the University of Louisville, and then started making my way around at faculty jobs and administrative jobs. Spent 14 years at the University of Arkansas, was dean at Baldwin Wallace University in Cleveland, Ohio for 2 years, and now I'm entering my second year down here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, Louisville and Arkansas had 2 good days today, by the way.
I was watching. Yeah. Sorry about that for the folks in the state of Tennessee.
I know. Yeah. Well, I want to ask you this question, first of all. Why this subject, Junior Gilliam?
So, as I have matured or aged, I really wanted to take on a challenge like this. I had 2 degrees in journalism and always fancied myself as a writer. And I'm a lifelong Dodgers fan, born in Los Angeles. And I really wanted a subject that connected both Brooklyn and Los Angeles. And the more I learned about the Negro Leagues, the more reading I did, I was fascinated by that. And so it occurred to me as I was looking at things that Jim Gilliam played on 7 World Series teams for the Dodgers. He won 4 World Series titles. He was in the Dodgers organization for 27 years. And he stood at what I characterize in the book, a series of gates. So the first gate was Jackie Robinson breaking integration line in baseball in 1947. The second gate was, at what point in time is it that a team is going to have more black players than white players in a lineup? And one can argue, and I certainly do this, that Gilliam was kept in the minors for 2 years after he joined the Dodgers, merely because the Dodgers already had Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, Joe Black, Sandy Amorose. They weren't ready for another black player. And then the third gate was blacks being accepted as coaches. And although Buck O'Neill and Gene Baker both served as coaches in the majors. They were bench coaches. Jim Gilliam became the first base coach for the Dodgers in 1965. He was the first Black to be on the field as a coach in Major League Baseball. And then the fourth gate, which Gilliam never got a chance to walk through, was becoming a manager in baseball. And obviously it took until 1975 when the Cleveland Indians hired Frank Robinson to be the first Black manager. But Gilliam, I found his story was fascinating. He has all these touch points at different moments of baseball history. Played on 7 World Series teams, is still in the Dodgers top 10 in a number of offensive categories. And he got 0 votes for the Hall of Fame. And it just strikes me that's maybe he wasn't a Hall of Fame player. I'm not arguing that, but he at least deserves some recognition. He was the only Dodger to have his uniform number retired that wasn't in the Hall of Fame until the Dodgers retired Fernando Valenzuela's 34 a couple of years ago. So now there are 2 Dodgers whose numbers have been retired that are not in the Hall of Fame.
But his number was retired only a few days after his passing.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
He died of a cerebral hemorrhage, I believe.
That is also correct. Yeah.
Had he had issues with his health?
That was tough to say. You know, I was fortunate to speak with his widow, Edwina, and she said that really didn't have anything. He was on some blood pressure medication. I talked to his daughter, Kathy, and it wasn't a secret that Jim liked to eat meat and potatoes, didn't really like green vegetables and things like that. So, I mean, he was definitely a Southern boy when it came to cooking and food. And that may have contributed to it. There's never been a conclusive thing, but you know, everybody that I talked to that was around him in the 1970s said he could look like he could still go and play. He was extremely fit, very active, played a lot of golf, all that.
Yeah. How about his years when he grew up in Nashville? I know he played for the Elite Giants, Baltimore Elite Giants. Before that, I think with the Black Vols, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
1945.
And what about his family? Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah. So his mother and father were married in 1928, just a few months before he was born. And so the assumption is that was kind of a marriage of necessity. They were both young. They were both in their teens. His father actually would pass away 2 months after Jim was born. And so Jim would go on to not have any brothers or sisters. His mother, whose name was Catherine, she went to work. You know, it was kind of never really could understand exactly what type of job she had. She may have worked as a domestic. She may have worked in a barbecue pit, a variety of different roles. So his grandparents raised him a lot. And it's not clear to me when he says in writings from the 1950s and 60s when he was quoted that his grandmother raised him, whether it was his maternal grandmother or his paternal grandmother. But we do know that they lived on Mark Street, which has now been raised at, I think I-24 pretty much goes over the spot where the home where they were raised in the 1930s there.
And I have read where his mother gave him his first baseball glove, maybe at 14 or something like that.
That's correct. I mean, she gave him his first baseball. I mean, he had always loved baseball, and his mother worked to save money so she could get him a baseball glove, and he would play in the sandlots. He would play against white kids as well as black kids. And so he was not playing totally segregated baseball growing up, even though he was going to all black schools. I think he was at, I'm trying to do this from memory, Ford Green Elementary and then Washington Middle School, and he attended Pearl High School there in Nashville. He was born at the Meharry Medical Center. So, I mean, he was integrated in that North Nashville part of town. You know, he got latched on at Sulphur Dell at a young age, started going there when he was 12, 13 years old. Willie White took him in, gave him some odd jobs around there. You know, one of the players for the Baltimore Elite Giants at that time was Roy Campanella. And so Roy jokes about having known Gilliam all his life, it seems like, in his biographies and in his writings. But the only job that I could find, I thought this was fascinating. The only job that I could find that Gilliam ever held outside of playing baseball, because he would start getting paid to play baseball. He was playing some semi-pro as a 14, 15-year-old. The only job that he held was as a porter at the Woolworths in downtown Nashville.
Wow. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And that Woolworths eventually became famous for sit-ins.
Of course, yeah. Absolutely.
Later than that, too. Willie White. A lot of people don't know who Willie White is. Tell us a little bit about Willie White.
So Willie, it seems like I don't know that I knew exactly what his title was, but
he held the Kings of the Kingdom at Sulphurdale.
That's really the way you would, when I interviewed you and you described him that way, I think I used that quote that he held the keys to Sulphurdale, and he didn't care whether kids were white or black. He would just open the gates of Sulphurdale, bring people in. He is credited with giving Gilliam his first set of spikes, his first set of shoes, and probably upgraded the glove that his mother had gotten him, and really gave Jim a chance, gave him pointers, and helped him get recognized by the Nashville Black Vols, and he signed and played the 1945 season as a 16-year-old in the Negro Southern League as part of the Nashville Black Vols.
That's amazing. I know Butch McCord also played that season, I think, and somebody else, and I can't remember who it was. It'll come to me in a minute. But he undoubtedly was good enough in those days to raise eyebrows from people who were interested in baseball, including Willie White. And who else? When he signed with the Baltimore Elite Giants, how did he get to that point?
Yeah, so so the Baltimore Elite Giants had their spring training essentially in Nashville, and so they held it at Sulphurdale, as far as I understand, and they would, Gilliam was around, and they saw how he had played with the Black Vols and brought him along as a 17-year-old. And the manager of the Elite Giants that was most influential was George Scales, who was a legendary Negro League infielder, shortstop, somebody who also was on the recent ballot for the Hall of Fame, but didn't get enough votes, unfortunately. But people that study the Negro Leagues understand and appreciate how good George Scales was in the 1920s and 30s. But he was the one who helped mentor Jim, and is credited in a number of ways of teaching him how to switch hit, giving him the nickname Junior, which Jim, after he got into the majors and started being successful, he really kind of wanted to distance himself from that. It's an interesting thing when we talk about that in a second, but Scales was, he recognized that Gilliam wasn't hitting a curveball, and he asked Jim, "Hey, did you ever swing left-handed?" Because Jim was a right bat throw guy, and there was a time once when Jim broke his arm when he was younger, like 10, 11 years old, had his right arm in a cast. And so in order to keep playing baseball, he would go and stand in the left-handed batter's box and just swing one-handed with his left hand. And so he was kind of familiar with it, but Scales really helped him recognize that, and was really influential in giving Jim his start. There were others on the Elite Giants who contributed in different ways, but Scales was the one that kind of discovered him there in Nashville and brought him into the Negro National League. Yeah.
Did he not say later that Willie White gave him the name Junior, or did Willie White take credit for that?
No. So the story goes when Scales was talking to Gilliam, and these things are all secondhand, thirdhand, different. Okay. You find different archive research and things like that. That the story goes that Scales was watching him miss curveballs and said, "Hey, Junior, why don't you get over to the left-hand box?" And Scales was literally twice the age of Gilliam at this time. Scales was in his late 30s. Jim's 17 years old, so the moniker kind of fit for him to call him Junior, and that stuck. It was funny doing research for this because the book is Jim Gilliam, the Forgotten Dodger. He's on the Nashville Sounds play at Junior Gilliam Way, as you talked about. there's a group of people that are Brooklyn Dodger diehard fans on Facebook, and I connected with several of these groups and talked to several individuals that gave personal reflections on getting to know Gilliam. And to a person, they all say, "Oh no, he's Junior. He was never Jim. He was Jim when he went to Los Angeles, but as long as he was in Brooklyn, he was Junior."
He was Junior. That's funny. Well, the Dodgers signed him in 1951.
Correct. Yep.
And for, I think I read was $11,000, something like that. Who'd that money go to?
Well, so that money went to the Eli Giants. I mean, so this is the period where the Negro Leagues, really the late 40s, early part of the 50s, as talented black players are transferred into the major leagues, as owners are compensating teams, or in some cases not compensating teams for signing a black player. The attention in black baseball shifted to the major leagues, and even you can see this in the coverage of the black press. So things like the Pittsburgh Courier and other Baltimore Afro-American and other newspapers, they kind of focused more on, we're going to cover Jackie Robinson, we're going to cover Larry Doby, we're going to cover Satchel Paige and how they're doing in the majors. And so there was less coverage for the Negro Leagues. And as a result, there was less attention for things. So toward that period of time, there were very few outstanding. By 1950, which was the last season that Gilliam played in the Negroes, by that point in time, Willie Mays is gone. Hank Aaron is getting ready to be gone. Ernie Banks getting ready to be gone. I mean, those guys all moved in that second wave of talent. And that ultimately led to the downfall of the Negro Leagues a few years after Gilliam. Right. And Gilliam, I should say, the Dodgers really made out like bandits on this, because they got Gilliam and Joe Black from the Baltimore Eli Giants for $11,000. They also got another pitcher named Leroy Farrell, who didn't pan out for the Dodgers. But $11,000 for Joe Black, who was the 1952 Rookie of the Year, Jim Gilliam, who was the 1953 Rookie of the Year. Pretty good investment.
Exactly. Now, he was sent to Montreal, 1951, Montreal Royals, which is where Jackie Robinson played his first year in organized ball. Is there any significance to that other than it being a minor league club for the Dodgers? Was it a place to send another black player out of the United States? Did that have anything to do with it at all?
So the Dodgers, I mean, yes, absolutely. It had to do with kind of the friendlier environment that Montreal presented. The Dodgers had sent Jackie Robinson there. Don Newcomb had been there. Roy Campanella had been there. At that point in time, teams had multiple AAA or the highest level minor league teams, so they could have sent him somewhere else. They just opted to do that. And he and Joe Black both played the 1951 season. They were roommates. They were really good friends. Joe, I was fortunate to talk to Joe's daughter, Martha, and his son, Chico. And Jim Gilliam wound up being the godfather for Chico Black. And they were able to tell me some stories about, the relationship that their father had with Jim Gilliam. And Joe and Jim probably couldn't have been more opposite individuals. Joe graduated from Morgan State in Baltimore, so he had a college degree. Jim Gilliam dropped out of Pearl High School after the 11th grade, never really finished high school. Joe was the one that encouraged Jim to read newspapers, and Jim could absolutely read, but that just wasn't his interest. And so Joe had that. Joe was a little bit more outspoken. Jim was much more quiet, much more reserved. But they got along really well, made a good tandem, and roomed together with the Eli Giants, helped them win a championship in the Negro Leagues, and then obviously went on to the Dodgers and had success there.
And then, so in 1951, he played for Montreal, had a decent season, 287. But in 1952, International League Most Valuable Player.
Yeah,
that's pretty special for a guy that's 2 years into the minor leagues, being groomed for a position that's being covered at the time, I think, by Jackie Robinson, or at least he had played that position before. So what's the significance of that MVP season, 1952?
So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that you can look back on this in retrospect and assess is the Dodgers lost the World Series in 7 games that year to the New York Yankees. And in 1951, obviously, they lost the pennant on the home run in the playoff with the New York Giants. I think a strong argument could be made that Gilliam's performance in the minors those 2 years indicated that he would have helped the Dodgers had they been willing to bring him up, that he was better than the white backups they kept. And so it's no knock on people like Bobby Morgan, Rocky Bridges, those individuals, but that's the players that were kept on the roster instead of Jim Gilliam. So Gilliam does, maybe this is kind of where you want to go next, but Gilliam goes to the 1953 spring training and everybody is talking about, is he going to move Jackie Robinson? Because Gilliam, even though Gilliam started off at Sulphur Dell as a third baseman, another thing that George Scales did was help him move over to second base. And he developed acuity there at second base, played with Pee Wee Butts at shortstop with the Baltimore Eli Giants, and they formed a great double play combination. So Gilliam played almost exclusively second base with the Montreal Royals. Well, that was the position Jackie Robinson had settled at. Remember, Jackie Robinson was a shortstop with the Kansas City Monarchs. The Dodgers put him at first, and then they moved him to second, and then they shifted him to third. And that was the thing that took place in spring training 1953, was that Gilliam got every chance to make the team. He did. It caused a domino effect that moved Jackie Robinson from second to third and sent effectively Billy Cox, who was the incumbent third baseman, to the bench. And that made it a point where the Dodgers had Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, or Joe Black on the mound, Jim Gilliam, Jackie Robinson, and Sandy Amorose. And so they would have 5 black players. They wouldn't start all 5 of them until 1954 in a game, even though they were all on the roster in 1953.
What a great year. His stats were .303 batting average in that last season in the International League, 109 RBI, and obviously promoted to the Major League club, which had won the National League pennant the previous season, you said. When the Dodgers broke from spring training and made their exhibition trek towards Brooklyn to begin the season, they came to Nashville.
They did, yeah.
And can you tell a little bit about that game?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a wonderful photo I found in the Nashville Tennessean showing the crowd at Sulphur Dell. And the crowd had overflowed from the bleachers and they had roped off part of the outfield and there were standing spectators in the outfield. As much to watch Jim Gilliam, I think, as it was to watch the Dodgers, and they were playing, I believe they were playing the Braves at the time. And those two teams were kind of barnstorming their way north and would play in different towns. Gilliam had a strong performance that day. At that point in time, I got to go back to my chronology here, but the Dodgers were still not actually having him on the active roster throughout spring training. He was kind of what we would call a non-roster invite. And so he hadn't actually had his contract purchased by the Major League club until right before the season began. And so Gilliam was performing. He got a hit in that game. I think he was off of Warren Spahn, if I recall right. And the crowds just turned out. And I think I made the point in the book that when the Dodgers had played there the prior year doing a spring training thing, that Gilliam wasn't with them and they drew about 6,000. And then with Gilliam, they drew over 12,000. So he was worth 6,000 spectators, which, for Sulphur Dell was bursting at the seams.
12,059 is what I have, what I read in the paper. Warren Spahn was the losing pitcher as the Braves mustered only 1 run on catcher Ebba St. Clair's homer. And the Dodgers' Dick Williams doubled off the left field wall and drove in 2 runs. But I have read it was their hometown favorite that came to see, and he did not disappoint. He was 2 for 4 that day.
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right. The African-American community came to see Jim Gilliam, a hometown player that they had kind of been paying close attention to his career. So he's in December, he's named the National League Rookie of the Year. Now, what a great honor that must be. And it kind of sets in tone the rest of his career, I think, doesn't it?
It does. He he started off really well. He had a stretch in that 53 season, like everybody does, where he couldn't buy a hit. And Walter Alston, Chuck Dressen, actually the manager at that time,
Right.
um, sat him down for a few games and just let him kind of recalibrate and get set. He hit a home run in the 1953 World Series. He wasn't a big home run hitter. The fact that he did that, he would later go on. He also hit a home run once in the Negro League All-Star game, and is the only player in baseball. I'm going a little out of chronology here. The only player in baseball history to hit a home run in both the Negro League All-Star game and the Major League Baseball All-Star game. He did that in '59 in Los Angeles. He hit one. So
Terrific.
but he led the league. I think he had 17 triples. And he was really renowned for his eye at the plate. I think he walked close to 100 times that rookie season for Brooklyn. Didn't strike out much. And he credits a lot to another Nashvilleian, Henry Kimbrough, with helping teach him how to have a patient eye at the plate and to hit behind the runner and move people along, which would become a hallmark of the way that Gilliam played. Very unselfish, team first type of attitude. But 53, he had a great season as Rookie of the Year. Fell off a little bit in 54. Played well in 55 when they won the World Series. 56 might have been one of his best statistical seasons. And throughout all this, the Dodgers, they never really committed to Gilliam as a player, but he would go to spring training sometimes in the late 50s, early 60s and not have a place to play because there's somebody else that was ready to take his job. And he'd always wind up playing in 150, 155 games, getting 650 plate appearances. And that's just the way that he was.
In 17 years, he had a lot of plate appearances. I think he undoubtedly was always low in the batting order. So he must have been trusted.
Well, I mean, he was during the 53 season, he led off for Brooklyn. He was a leadoff batter for them. And then in the 60s, when Maury Wills was leading off, Gilliam always was hitting second, hitting behind him, trying to move him along. Yeah.
Yeah. When I mentioned that 12,067 fans that showed up at Sulphurdale, his first time back as a Dodger.
Mm-hmm.
The next season, they played the Braves again, and they drew 12,006, according to the newspaper. So pretty steady.
Yeah.
Pretty steady interest there for good old Junior Gilliam, I think, too.
He was a good calling card.
I think so. 1958, the Dodgers moved. I wonder how excited he was about moving to Los Angeles.
That he was a company person, so he was going to do whatever the Dodgers wanted to do. He had a home in New Jersey, across the river from New York in New Jersey. And he started toward the end of his career in Brooklyn having some marital difficulties. It was a pretty public, at least in the black press, some marital difficulties that he was having. He had 2 children at that point in time, Malcolm and Kathy. And, he moved out there. He didn't like to fly, so he probably wasn't overly excited about the fact that they were going to have to do that a little bit more, but he would do that. He had never been to Los Angeles. I take that back. He had barnstormed to the West Coast. He'd barnstormed to Hawaii and places like that with, the Brooklyn Dodgers had even gone to Japan. So he had been to the West previously, but growing up in Nashville, going to Baltimore, going to Brooklyn, those were the places that he was probably most comfortable.
Walt Alston became his manager, who had also been his manager in Montreal, I think.
Correct.
He liked him, didn't he?
Oh,
he liked Junior Gilliam.
Yeah, they got along really well. They both were kind of, I've said the term company man, but they were both that way with regard to the Dodgers. So Alston managed him in 51 and 52 in Montreal. 53, the Dodgers, when he was his rookie year, Chuck Dressen was the manager. And then in 54, the Dodgers promoted Walt Alston after they didn't offer Dressen a contract. The Dodgers were famous for only issuing 1-year contracts to their managers. Dressen wanted 2 years. Dodgers, Walter O'Malley said no. So they promoted Walter Alston, and Walter Alston would stay as the manager from 54 through his retirement in the 76 season, after the 76 season. So Gilliam played 1 year, the 53 season, not for Alston, played every other year for Alston. When Gilliam retired, Alston made him that first base coach for the Los Angeles Dodgers. They just got along really well. And in fact, I forget who it was that told me this story. It might have been John Warehouse or Nate Oliver, one of those guys that played in the 60s with the Dodgers. But they said that they really had two managers on the team, that Alston would stay in the dugout and Gilliam would walk over to the pitcher's mound, calm the pitcher down if he saw something, kind of recalibrate the defense, whatever needed to be done. And he would pick up on things so that Alston never had to come out to the mound, because Gilliam was so in tune. He had such a high baseball IQ, which is also what Alston had. And so I think that they were very respectful of one another as a result of that.
Was Gilliam ever considered as a manager for any team that you recall?
Not for a major league team. He did manage only one team. It was the San Juan Senadores 1 year in the Puerto Rican League, 73-74, I believe, is the year that he managed them. And I was able to talk to several players that played with him, or played for him, on that team. So there was a catcher that would play in the majors, Eliseo Rodriguez, who was from Puerto Rico. Tom Walker, who was a pitcher, the Pirates. His son was Neil Walker of the Mets. Baylor Moore, who pitched with the Angels and the Expos. And actually, when Gilliam was managing, Baylor Moore threw a perfect game in the Puerto Rican Winter League. And they all said, what IQ he had, how he helped them as a player, and things like that. He was talked about a lot, I found, in the media. So whether it was Sport Magazine or the Sporting News or Baseball Digest or any of those types of publications in the late 60s, early 70s, because he was a coach, he was a natural person to be talked about as who's going to be the first black manager. It was Hank Aaron, it was Ernie Banks, and those guys hadn't retired yet in the late 60s, and Aaron would go on for several more years to play. Banks would play into the early 1970s. Frank Robinson was also mentioned, but again, Frank Robinson was still playing. So Gilliam was mentioned, but he never got a chance. And I asked Edwina about that, and she said that I'm sure he would have liked to have managed, but he was happy doing whatever the Dodgers wanted him to do.
Yeah.
So he was happy with his role. I also asked Dusty Baker the same question about whether Jim would have ever wanted to manage, because Dusty played with him in 77 and 78 with the Dodgers, 76, 77, 78. And he said he didn't think that Jim ever really wanted to manage because Jim wasn't, he and Tommy Lasorda were polar opposites of one another. When Tommy Lasorda took over for Walt Alston in 1977 season, Lasorda's, the gregarious, outgoing, talkative person, and Gilliam is not. He's reserved. He would give pretty short answers to the media during his playing days, very matter-of-fact responses. He didn't want those types of responsibilities as manager. At least that's what Dusty Baker felt.
Was there any that you're aware of, any issues with him being a black man playing in what had been a white man's sport up until 1947? Do you recall anything that being mentioned about that he had any issues? Or
he never really talked about it too much. He wasn't, whereas Jackie Robinson became much more outspoken about integration and about baseball. Jim didn't really do that. There was an instance I found in 1951, and I thought this was interesting, where I got it out of Roger Kahn's papers from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And he had this story in 1951 when Montreal was playing at Buffalo and Joe Black was pitching. And there was a lot of uses of the N-word as it related to Joe Black as a pitcher. And Gilliam, from where he was playing on the infield, could see that Black was getting all upset. And he went over and calmed Black down and just basically said, look, if you do this, we're never going to get a chance. I know what you want to do, but if you do this, we're not going to get a chance. So he was much more kind of just letting things go, not really being outspoken about things. Now, of course, he did talk about getting an education in life, traveling through the South as a member of first the Black Vols and then the Eli Giants, and experiencing the racism that existed at that time, and even to the point where in spring training for the Dodgers, Vero Beach was a pretty segregated community, and there was a black part of town, Gifford, which is the neighboring town to Vero Beach, and that's where the black players would go. Vero Beach, Dodgertown was integrated, but they would go basically across the tracks to this other town, and that's where they could go to the movies or go to the barber and things like that. The Dodgers would go down to Miami as part of their spring training and play a bunch of games down there, and so they would stay in Miami, and all the black players had to go and stay at a different hotel. So he experienced those things, but he never really talked about them or complained about them.
It just hit me. 1945 with the Black Vols, Bill Greason, Reverend Bill Greason, who's 100 years old and still lives in Birmingham. He and Willie Mays were the last two until last year members of that played in the 1948 Negro Leagues World Series. So Bill Greason was a part of that team with Gilliam also and Butch McCord. Did he have a close teammate through his career, either with the Dodgers or, I know you mentioned Black, but are there others that maybe he was a little closer to throughout his baseball career or beyond?
So with what I got from a sense from the players of the 1960s that I talked to was that he got along with just about everybody. He and Wes Parker were big card players. So I talked to Wes about this, and there's a great story about Charles Gorin, the guru of bridge. And Gorin and Walter Alston played Parker and Gilliam one year in spring training in a game of bridge, and Parker and Gilliam won. Wow. And Parker was pretty good. He actually would go on to play some competitive bridge as well. But so he got along with the white players like Wes Parker. I remember Nate Pee Wee Oliver, who was an infielder with the Dodgers, a black gentleman from St. Petersburg, Florida. He was talking about how, just like Jackie had passed things on to Gilliam was passing down the history of black baseball to Nate Oliver. Dusty Baker told me about every time they would go to St. Louis, they would drive out to Cool Papa Bell's house, and Baker said he would just sit there and listen to these stories like he was a mouse in church. And Dusty said half of them were probably lies, but that's, okay. That's what makes it colorful, right? So he got along. It seemed like with quite a few people. Carl Erskine said he was a great teammate.
Right.
1950s. Yeah.
Well, it appears to me he was a calming effect on so many. As we moved out of that segregated baseball into integrated baseball, I think some of that had already passed with Jackie Robinson and others that came along. But through that 60s on into the 70s, and certainly the responsibility that he had as a coach with the Dodgers had to have some kind of an influence. And you're talking about some people like Wes Parker that undoubtedly really admired him. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that Gilliam would be the one that would recognize the qualities of a man in that baseball realm. Now, Gilliam died on September the 15th, 1978. He was 49. That's way too young.
Yeah, no, actually, that's when he slipped into a coma. He passed away in October on the eve of the World Series.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what kind of tribute came from that? I mean, I know there was a funeral and.
Yeah. So, as the fates would have it, the Yankees and the Dodgers were playing in the 1978 World Series. And the first two games took place in Los Angeles, and the Dodgers won game one. And then on October the 10th, 1978, game two, that was the day of the funeral and the service that morning. And then Dodgers would go out and win game two. They would go to New York and subsequently lose the next four games. But it got a lot of attention merely because the national media were in town. And so all the national media went to the funeral because that's where a lot of members of both teams, but certainly the Dodgers, but Reggie Jackson was there, represented the Yankees. Reverend Jesse Jackson presided over the services, gave a speech that I was able to find in its entirety in a newspaper, and talks about the headwinds that Jim faced throughout his life growing up in segregated Nashville, growing up fatherless after his dad passed away at a young age, growing up playing in the Negro Leagues and not being able to play in integrated ball and things like that. So he talked a lot about the different headwinds. That was what Reverend Jackson titled that. It was quite a service. It was a warm Indian summer day. The crowd was spilling out of the Baptist church there in Los Angeles, and it was by all accounts a very good, somber ceremony. A lot of sadness from the people that I talked to that were there. People hard to recall things 50 years after the fact sometimes, but or 40 years after the fact. But it was something that a fitting tribute, I guess, if you will, to Gilliam. They retired his number. If you go on YouTube, you can find the beginning of the game that ABC is broadcasting and the tribute that the public address announcer makes to Gilliam and how quiet the stadium got. I mean, I was watching that and I'm thinking, wow, this is, it's ABC, it's Howard Cosell and everybody else. It was so quiet. All you could hear was the helicopter that was circling over Dodger Stadium at the time. And it was pretty prolonged. I mean, it was about a 30-second moment of silence. Wow. It was very moving for sure.
I can only imagine. Steve, I'm going to think of 100 things here after we close this, but tell people where they can get your book.
So it's available at any of your favorite booksellers online. Primarily, I don't know that it's being stocked in physical brick and mortar stores. The publisher is August Publications, which is based out of Minneapolis. You can buy it directly from them as well. Yeah, I mean, it's also available in, ebooks, Kindles, or Nooks, or whatever your ebook reader is. We didn't do an audio book of it, so right now it's just a paperback, no hard copy or hardcover copy. $22 is the list price on it.
But you'll be in Nashville.
I will be in Nashville, yes. Very excited about that. I'm excited as part of the Negro League celebration for the 9 on June 20th, Friday, June 20th. We'll be there. The Sounds have graciously invited me to come and be there to sign copies of the books. I know they've ordered copies of the books. They'll have it available for purchase inside the stadium as well.
And I'll be there. Will you sign mine?
Absolutely, I will, Skip. Thank you so much. I appreciate the support.
Listen, this has been great. Honestly, I could go on, and there may be some other time that we'll be able to sit down and talk again. I wish you the best with the luck with the book. Have you got another one that you're working on? You may have other projects.
So I started this. It's actually kind of a funny story. I started it in late 2019, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I've never written a book like this. I didn't know who to call or who to connect to or anything like that. And COVID hit and really got into things in COVID. I remember the interview I did with Dusty Baker. He was driving back from picking his son up from college, or driving to pick his son up from college or something like that, because COVID had hit. It was March of 2020. I really enjoyed the process. It was wonderful. I love archival research. Interlibrary loan librarians are wonderful people. They're magicians to find obscure Black media from the 1950s. I would give them very little information. And so I would love to do another project. Since that point in time and that period, I've moved into a little bit more responsibility in this administrative role. So I don't have quite as much free time as I did when I was just a faculty member.
You're a young man. You'll find the time down the road one of these days. Well, look, Steve, it's been great. I can't thank you enough for doing this. And once again, we'll do it again, hopefully down the road. And I'll certainly see you on the 20th at the Sounds Ballpark.
Sounds great, Skip. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Everyone, you've been listening to Steve Ditmore. He's the author of The Forgotten Dodger, Jim Gilliam. And I hope you'll go to your favorite bookstore online or in your area, and certainly at the Nashville Sounds ball game, and purchase a copy of his book. It's a wonderful book. He's done great research on this. And Junior Gilliam is a worthy subject, especially for us Nashvillians and also the Dodger fans and all baseball fans. Steve, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Skip.